Hello guys, welcome to this tutorial or introduction guide to Heroes of Hammerwatch, Moon Temple, and Mercenary Mode. So I have these guys listed here with their names being the way that I rank them, and I have them ranked in order. This is specifically for Mercenary Mode, and I will go into detail in what I think is the best build for starting off each character, and I will try to explain to you guys the process of how to properly build a class, and I will try to do a showcase playthrough playing with one of the characters that I'll probably just be using, Warlock, or actually Witch Hunter. I think Witch Hunter is the best example to showcase why I think he's one of the best characters to play Mercenary. But before we start, if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you click that button, subscribe, and yeah, press like, share this with your friends who also are learning about Heroes of Hammerwatch, specifically Mercenary Mode. And yeah guys, have a good one. So I would like to showcase what each class has, and I will show why I think they are ranked the way they are. So let's just start off with the best. These three classes, the Warlock, the Witch Hunter, and the Sorcerer, are, in my opinion, it doesn't mean that they are they're definitely the best, but in my opinion they are the best. So in the game, Mercenary Mode, usually going primary is the best way to go about things, but you can get away with certain classes to do skill. Warlock is one of those that you can do pure skill from the very beginning and dish out a lot of damage. In multiplayer, the game mode is actually pretty good. It opens up a lot of opportunity for team play. That's why I have other classes here ranked higher than they should. For example, like the Paladin. Paladin is actually an amazing support class in NG0 in multiplayer, but struggles to get along and dealing damage on its own when playing solo. So anyways, let me just go ahead and showcase the Warlock. So initially you start off with 25k, but I have already spent on what I think is essential for the Warlock. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys what I'm using. So for skills, I am using Thorn Knives and First Aid. First Aid is just an ability that basically gets rid of all debuffs and heals you for a flat amount. We're using On the Prowl to move faster and have some evasion. Also, we're running Flames of Devotion, which is our main source of damage increase. And we're using Remedy, that way First Aid and Warlock's primary heals me for a lot more. So this is actually a pretty solid all-around build. It does a lot of physical damage. When it comes to the knives, it does a lot of magical damage thanks to the Flames of Devotion and the dagger. But there's things to note. So for example, each dagger does 32 damage, and the Flames of Devotion, if stacked up to the max, which is 12, adds up 12 magical damage. So basically my damage actually increases to 44 per dagger, which is actually pretty strong early on, which allows me to kill bosses much faster than I should. And considering how Warlock has a really strong mana regen thanks to his Soul Dagger passive, you can just go and max out your mana regen in the Man at Arms. You buy 3 stages and you'll end up with 19k. This would allow me to just spam daggers at a moderate amount, and while auto attacking I'll be able to spam even more. There are other strats you could use. You can also go for a support build, which basically just requires you to use fire breath instead. And if you're supporting allies, eventually you may want to use company banner, so their damage output is increased even further. But I would say stick with On the Prowl and use Biting Chill. And you can use any other passive really. Celestial Orbs, since Biting Chill, all it does is it slows down enemies and sometimes freezes them. And Celestial Orbs just constantly procs it. You can also use Remedy to keep yourself alive. You can also use Fanatic Zeal for more damage, but since you're going for support, Shield is good, Ice Barrier is good. Also having Sidestep and On the Prowl to make sure that you're always alive is also a pretty good option. Murder of Crows is actually pretty hilarious in combination with Biting Chill. The crows can also proc the freeze, so they just mess around with enemies and make sure that no one gets hurt. But yeah, so if it was me, I would just stick with Remedy. But for the meantime, we're gonna be showcasing the Flames of Devotion with the Throwing Knives build. This is a standard all-around build. For this reason alone is why I mark Warlock to be the best class to start off in Mercenary Mode, since he has the flexibility of being a support, an assist killer. He can also kill a lot of enemies and kill bosses relatively fast. And he benefits from basically most passives. So he has the most flexible builds. Moving on, we can go ahead to what I think is the best primary attacker in the whole Mercenary Mode, which would be the Witch Hunter. So the Witch Hunter has at start a pretty meh auto attack, but you will notice that as I keep attacking and landing attack speed, my attack speed keeps increasing, and I'm ditching a lot of damage, like really strong. This is thanks to the passive Slice and Dice. So you will notice that in my build, I am currently just using First Aid as my only way of healing myself, also a good way to remove debuffs. And then I'm just using Slice and Dice, Flames of Devotion, and Vicious Cuts. This is what I call a boss killer build. If you're doing multiplayer with a friend, it's really good idea to have a wave clearer, as I call them. Typically using twinned arrows, so that way your attack spreads out. So for example, I'm not shooting that guy over there, but eventually I get to hit him, you see? So it's pretty good. It's pretty good at clearing waves of enemies much faster than you normally would. But we're not talking about too much about that build. We're going to be focusing on solo builds on the Witch Hunter for the meantime. And yeah, so this is the build that I would recommend to you to use. Again, you would use all points on mana regen so that you can have at least a decent amount so that you're able to actually spam First Aid. Other things to note about Witch Hunter is he doesn't have a movement penalty for shooting, so that makes him really strong against bosses and makes his playstyle relatively safe. Also, he has the flexibility of becoming a skill-based character on later NGs. Alright, so now moving on, we're going to go ahead and showcase what I think is the third best character in Mercenary Mode, the Sorcerer. So the Sorcerer has something hilarious about him. The fact that he can bounce between enemies and his auto attack makes him very good at clearing waves of enemies. But if you're utilizing twinned arrows on top of Flames of Devotion and Slice and Dice, you will notice that his attack speed gets ridiculously fast, and at the same time it's just proccing twin arrows. So you get to see all these numbers. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. I like it. So we're using the same build, same concept as the Witch Hunter, but we're applying also the same concept as the Warlock. In this case, it will require you to sacrifice some more of your money for skill points so that you're able to get a second ability. So we're gonna go ahead and pick First Aid and Fire Breath. Fire Breath is the cheaper option than throwing knives, and still really strong at killing bosses. So with this build is really good all around. Flames of Devotion with Fire Breath makes Fire Breath stupid strong, and it's really good for killing bosses or single targets, whereas Twin Arrows takes care of a bunch of enemies. So this is very strong, as you can tell. You can also play as a support sorcerer, but I wouldn't advise to do so when you have the ability of just killing things at a faster pace with this build, you know? So there's not much to say except for just be cautious with your starting gold and all that. Make sure you make the right purchases, and yeah. So one thing I want to know, I'm not showing you what drinks to use so far, because I think everybody should be using the same drink setup for every build that I'm showcasing. Alright, so at the tapster over here, you're always gonna get Smelly Old Man, so you can increase your mana regen to like 6, 5, 4, depending on what class you're playing, and that will just make it reliable for you to just keep using First Aid and Fire Breath. If you are playing a support, do not use Enchanted Slammer. Otherwise, if you're using a primary build, you must use Enchanted Slammer unless you're okay without using it. In the case that you have time in your hands, then yeah, you can spend a little longer on the run and not have Enchanted Slammer, but Enchanted Slammer is a huge plus. It's 10 physical damage. So it comes at the cost of area auto attack takes away your mana, and that is why we are be using max mana regen from the mana arms, and we also use Smelly Old Man. Now that I covered up the two main drinks, there's other things that I would recommend. If you're just here for the clear and you don't really care about, let's say, progressing to ridiculous high NGs, then I recommend that you use On the Run and Mellow Mist together, and just leave your drinks the way it is. Just Smelly Old Man, Enchanted Slammer, On the Run, and Mellow Mist. But if you're going to be doing this for the very long run and pushing as far as you can, then I would highly recommend that you do Smelly Old Man, Enchanted Slammer, Miner's Delight, Fool's Errand, and On the Run. The reason why you want to be using Miner's Delight and Fool's Errand is because since you can't go back to the previous NGs, there's no way to properly farm ore and gold. So you'll probably be just using Miner's Delight and Fool's Errand just to balance Miner's Delight, and that way you can just ultimately just farm a lot of ore and be able to afford everything that you can, and your runs will become much successful for later NGs. And yeah, so now that I touched upon the best builds, I will try to go with other optional builds that are still usable, they're viable, still. I think every character is viable in a way, but if you're trying to do this in the more efficient and optimal way, those 3 characters, the Sorcerer, the Warlock, and the Witch Hunter, are probably your best call. But let's just move on to optional. You know, we got the Ranger and the Paladin, which I rank them as really good classes. Not the best, but they are good at what they do. Ranger is very similar to the Witch Hunter. It has the same build: it's First Aid, Slice and Dice, and Flames of Devotion with Vicious Cuts. And the only thing that you can tell is that I didn't really spend my initial gold, but I'll just show you. Go ahead, boom, and you'll start off with 3.13 mana regen, which is still not that great. But once you drink up the Spellion mana, it'll go up to 5, which means that every 5 seconds you'll have a First Aid, you know? It's pretty useful. With the remaining 4 stars, I recommend that you attune an item. This goes for every other class. Yeah. Usually you can only attune with 3 stars the common items. And my choices for you would probably be Markham's Purse or Lucky Charm. You can also throw in things like Book of Enlightenment, as gaining XP is also very limited in the beginning of the game. But there's not much need to go into details. Pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, Ranger is the same thing as Witch Hunter. It's just not as good as Witch Hunter. So I could attack and do damage, but my attack speed is only as good as it can get if I stand still. This is very problematic when fighting bosses, as most bosses require you to move so that you don't die, you know? So this is actually a really good class if you plan to play multiplayer. If you play single player, Ranger is not as amazing as the Witch Hunter, but you can still manage to complete the NG. You just have to play at a slower pace. But yeah, there's nothing wrong in playing the Ranger. So if you like the Ranger a lot, or that's the only class that you have at level 20, then, you know, go ahead, use it. It's really good. Passing through to the Paladin, as I marked them as a good class as well. I want to make a note that this is a support build. So you will notice that I have expended a lot of points again. And I kind of spent 2 points unnecessarily. But that's because I want to showcase what the possibilities are. So the current build that I have is Fire Breath with combo of Biting Chill. So what that does, really quick, before I explain everything else, is that if I use my flamethrower, you're gonna see that they're frozen and slowed. Because of the high amount of damage that's being dealt, the likelihood of them being frozen is much higher thanks to the speed. So that's the idea of supporting. You can freeze things at will with the combination of Fire Breath and Biting Chill. You can also use Lane Hands to heal yourself and your allies while also applying a damage reduction buff, which is what makes you a really good support. As an optional, if you have enough stars, that is, you can also use Company Banner. So Company Banner, what it does is that when you place it on the ground, it's like an entity on the floor that has HP, so it also calls the attention of enemies. So it could die, but while it's alive, it creates a radius in which it increases the attack speed and skill speed of all allies inside of the banner's range. This also increases their mana regen, which is pretty useful. It makes you loved by your allies. So this is very, very solid for multiplayer play, especially if you're playing with friends and you're coordinating. This is really good. Using on the prowl, so you can have evasion and movement speed when casting any of the skills, and sidestep for guaranteed evasion and more evasion points. Things that you could change around, you can change sidestep and use, I don't know, shield. You can use remedy. You can also use things like combustion, so you can proc biting chill more often. You can also use flame shield itself, since when you get hits it will reduce the damage that you take and also trigger a blast wave, which also gets affected by biting chill. So it's really good. You can also do murder crows if you're trying to go cheaper for defensive stats and proccing biting chill. But yeah, there are other ways to play the paladin. Ultimately, you don't want to be playing too much paladin solo in NG0 at least. But if you are determined in doing so, I will let you know that it's really good to have a paladin in the higher NGs. And by higher NGs, I mean like NG2 and above, where your HP becomes very useful and allows you to just use strings that give you basically all the mana that you need, and you can use any skill that you want and spam it and stay alive, yeah. But if you were to use paladin, I would recommend that you use something like this. Probably vicious cuts or twinned arrows, but yeah, let's just go with vicious cuts. You can also remove on the prowl and just use shield and play like an old paladin. So it's basically paladin all over again, but with more abilities. And if you do buy all the stars, you have access to throwing knives and first aid. With throwing knives and flames of devotion, that makes it that you can kill bosses much faster. And you can also change vicious cuts for twin arrows so that you're actually able to clear waves much faster. It's actually pretty funny. I've done it before, but if you cluster a bunch of enemies and you just auto attack a whole wave of them, it just triggers a bunch of twinned arrows everywhere. It's pretty fun. But yeah, those are the two builds. This is the solo build for NG0, and the previous build that I was showcasing is the teamwork one. Anyways, Paladin, pretty solid character, not the best, but he is very strong at later on and very strong as a support early on. Moving on, we're gonna go on to the decent characters. We have Thief and we have the Gladiator. They both have the same issues, that they're melee and don't have a lot of defensiveness to them. The Gladiator is lacking mana regen, but has HP. And the Thief is lacking HP, while it has a decent amount of mana regen. So, you can start off with always getting the mana regen. I want to emphasize on that. And you get Fire Breath with Biting Chill, kind of like the support build. But this is actually for boss killing and wave clearing. And then we have first aid to heal ourselves. We have combustion, just for additional damage, a combination of biting chill and fire breath, and flames of devotion because really he needs it. He needs a lot of damage. Considering that he's a melee character, he runs the risk of dying. So it's cool. It's good to do some melee damage and stay away, and then flamethrower things to death, and then just go back in when there's a few characters, kill them off. But yeah, it's pretty strong. It's just it takes some very accurate play. So I wouldn't oppose to the idea of playing Thief. I like playing Thief as well. It's just a little on the harder side to play, you know. So nothing against him. He's still pretty good character. Pretty decent mana pool. It's just the HP is pretty abysmal, and the damage comes from melee attacks. But yeah, I'll move on quickly to the Gladiator, which faces very similar issues, but the case would be that it has very low mana regen, even with mana arms. However, it does benefit for one thing, and that is the combination of Flames of Devotion and Vicious Cuts, because of his passive auto attack. Sorry about that. So pretty slow at first, right? But as you know, if you click multiple times, you will be expending the charges that you see right over here. They go up for every 1/4 of a second, I think. I'm not sure. It goes up to 15, and you can just expend all the charges and basically just attack really fast. So it's basically just there to benefit from Vicious Cuts. Otherwise, you'll be using Throwing Knives to kill waves of enemies from afar at a safe distance, pull them over, attack. There's not much to say about Gladiator. It's pretty basic play. As if you've been playing Gladiator in other modes, then it should come to nature how to play Gladiator. And usually Gladiator requires a higher skill cap. And lastly, we're going to be going to the difficult. I'm not ranking them as worse, or I'm not ranking them as bad. I'm just ranking them as difficult, meaning that they're hard to make use of. They're still viable in completing the towers in Merc mode. They're still strong once you get past the first few NGs. They just have some negatives that make them not as appealing as the other classes. So we're gonna start off with the priest. And when I think of the priest, I think of the new changes that they did, where he can now auto attack and use skills. So that's really strong. We are gonna be using Slice and Dice, Flames of Devotion, On the Prowl, and Throwing Knives. The great thing about the priest is his high mana regen. Once you take the Fool's Errand, his mana regen goes up to 7, and that means you get to spam anything at a relatively safer way. And then when it comes to killing bosses, you have a pretty decent range in which you could be safe from the damage of the bosses, and you could just go up to them and kill them with a spam of Throwing Knives with the power of Flames of Devotion. So really strong. The only upset is the HP, and the range of the auto attack is not the greatest, but thanks to the ability of his splash, you can actually get. Can I get the angle? Maybe. Ooh. There you go. It has a radius, so you can hit 2 targets at once. So it's pretty strong. It's just, it requires more precise play. So again, it's not a bad class. It's a little hard. But if you enjoy playing the priest, go ahead. By all means, have fun. It uses the same concept in terms of drinks as I was explaining earlier. And lastly, Oh boy, the wizard. The wizard, I love and hate this character. The attack speed, even with slice and dice, is just not as great. It's just not as great. Sure, you have the safe distance, but look, every single time they add out attack, I have to stop. And that gives the opportunity for the enemy to catch up to me. That is why I am using Biting Chill, so that when I land my auto attacks, I slow them down at the very least. Otherwise, I'm just using the same concept as the Priest, as the Warlock, and the Thief, where we're just using Throwing Knives, Flames of Devotion to kill bosses, and we're going to be using First Aid as our main source of healing, Slice and Dice to increase our DPS, and Biting Chill just to support the one negative that this class has. Well, the other negative is also the very low HP, the lowest HP in the game actually. And you will see that if I max out my mana regen, my mana regen is just about the same as the Priest, but it's relatively high. It's still relatively high. So it gives you the ability of spamming throwing knives. But yeah, there's not much else to say. The only thing I can do is just showcase what the classes do. I'll try to do that on the per video basis. I hope that this was very useful for you. That you learn how, at least how I approach things. I have gotten to general already. Not in this profile, on a different profile, but on this YouTube channel, I am gonna go ahead and utilize this profile that I have. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and try to play each and one of these, showcase how to play them. At least I will do my best in doing so. And I will try to maybe show you how to get to general in the fast way. Anyways guys, stay tuned. If you are looking for playthroughs, I will be posting them at a later date. And yeah guys, I hope you learned something, and yeah, have a good one. Bye bye.